Hello. Happy Friday. It's the last day of March. Friday the 31st, everybody. Get ready for shenanigans tomorrow. Right? Tomorrow's the day where you're gonna get weird ads for things that don't make sense and people posting almost April. Tomorrow is April. Hi Sharkies, how's it going? Mini cake? Wait, it says first time chat. Why does it say first time chat? Long time no see. How's it going? You've already missed the sunshine. Yeah, it's pretty rainy, dreary day. You missed this. We missed you. We're reading another Terry Pratchett, Witches Abroad. We're not super far in, a little ways. 'Twas a damp and dreary day picking up the kids from school. Ben, say hello to Mini Cake. I will give you a piece of mini rice cake. A mini piece of rice cake. Oh, what have you been up to, Mini Cake? It's been a little while, as we just covered. What's new? Yay, puppy dog. Yes. Yeah, your puppy dog. Your puppy dog. Now grab a piece of cake so you can wag your tail. Piece of cake. Piece of rice. Piece of rice cake. His snacks right now are fragments of, those rice pucks that taste like absolutely nothing. He likes the crunch. Going to rehab lately, so that's been a ride. Okay, well, good for you to be going. Stick with it. No one can resist a good crunch. Yeah, Ben likes the crunch. He likes cucumbers and carrots and snap peas. I mean, he also likes non-healthy things like bacon or whatever. But he is very excited to get anything with a good crunch. Oh, last day of March. We had a house showing today. They had come and viewed the place some time ago, maybe at like an open house. So I'm kind of like hoping, okay, if they were here a while ago and now they're coming back, like maybe we were on their list and they've narrowed it down and they're like, maybe this is the place, We're going into a new month, so maybe they'll want to like start the process at the beginning of the month to move in midway through or something like that. Fingers crossed, that would be good. And then yesterday was fun. I had food poisoning. So, I don't know. Hopefully I'll be all right through the stream tonight, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Yeah. I'm mostly over it today, but not completely. Oh no, yeah, yesterday was one of those, like, I'm staying on the couch within easy access to the bathroom. Not eating much. Yeah, I had chicken soup and a grilled cheese sandwich, and the grilled cheese was maybe pushing it because they're a little greasy, but gotta have some kind of sandwich to dip in the soup. I'm a dipper. I'm a soup dipper. I gotta dip a sandwich in a soup. That's who I am. So that was good. Grilled cheese and chicken noodle soup are definitely a comfort food for me. Comfort food combo. Back to slightly more normal food today. I had some lemongrass chicken on vermicelli. Pretty good. Hopefully it doesn't upset the tum too much. We'll see. If I if I suddenly abort the stream and you know I'll that'll be why. Yeah, I like lemongrass chicken. It's not the most like exciting, but it's I don't know, it's solid. Um, and it's something that is pretty tough to get wrong. I feel like it's hard to mess up lemongrass chicken. Ben's giving me a long stare down there. There's a few movies in theaters right now that I want to go see that I have not gotten around to yet. There's, I think, three movies I want to go see. The new Shazam, because the first one was entertaining. It's it's a little, it's one of those superhero movies that's a little goofier, but that's fun. So there's Shazam. There's the Dungeons and Dragons movie, which honestly I've actually been hearing decent things about. Um, so fingers crossed that that's actually all right. I don't have high hopes for it because it's a D&D movie, and traditionally those aren't great. But maybe this is the one. It seems like it's got a bigger budget. Maybe they're like actually like doing their best to make it decent. And then what's the third one? There was a third movie too. Shazam, D&D. Armos, what's the third movie? Ah, yeah, John Wick. John Wick 4. I had seen they've got like cameos from the like 70s, 80s cartoon characters in it. Just in the background. I think they were in the trailer. They were like somewhere in the background in the trailer. So, if it's doing things like that, hopefully it'll be alright. Who is in the. Was Jeremy Irons in one of the like previous D&D movies? I feel like Jeremy Irons was in one, or someone like that. I don't think you're not missing much. I'm not certain it was Jeremy Irons. It could have been someone else, but I think it might have been him. Bob's been giving me a look this whole time. Was it somehow different? All the previous D&D movies were aeons before you started playing. It's interesting going back to like I definitely consumed some media, mostly books, that was based on D&D before I played D&D. And so it is interesting going back and looking at those afterwards. I've talked about some of them here before, like the books by Raymond E. Feist, the Magician Saga, which becomes like the Rift War cycle, um, are based on D&D, and you can't really tell with like the core first couple of books But like the third or fourth book, you can really tell when you go and read it later, which is it's an interesting change because it's like I know that the first two books are based on a D&D campaign, but most of the characters don't in the books behave like D&D characters. They just are characters in a fantasy setting. But when you get to like the third or fourth book, suddenly you've got a hastily assembled party. There's like a dark elf ranger with an animal companion. It's very clearly, a D&D character. There's a rogue that, does trap finding and things like that. Like they it's much more obvious. Just but not in like every book, but in like one of them in particular. I think it's a Darkness at Sethanon. I think the book is A Darkness at Sethanon is the one I'm thinking of. That's just like it was clearly like a self-contained campaign that got turned into a book, and it was like, yeah. And I didn't know that my first time reading it, and I didn't know the tropes because I hadn't, I couldn't recognize the classes as what they were. I mean, the rogue was obviously a rogue, but it wasn't obviously a D&D rogue to me at the time. So rereading that later, it was just like, oh, they're not even trying to hide it in this one. um, what else? There's been other things like that. I mean, the Dragonlance books. Um, right here I've got Dragonlance. But I read a lot of Dragonlance books as a kid, which is, long before I um, started playing. And fairly recently, just over like the past year or so, I've read the first couple of Dragonlance books again, just, Dragons of Autumn Twilight and Dragons of Winter something. I forget. Um, I haven't gotten around to. I think I finished the second book, but I haven't gotten to the third one yet. Um, there's a lot of Dragonlance books. Like it's a whole setting. Um, but it is interesting going back to them as a D&D player and being like, I don't know, looking at a fight scene. There's a scene in Dragons of Autumn Twilight where they're like creeping through these ruins that have been taken over by like the dragon armies, and they've got the dragon armies that have taken over these ruins have at one point this bizarre elevator type setup going where it's basically just buckets that are going up and down, and they've got these captive, they're called gully dwarfs, which are just these, I don't know, goofy little dirty dwarfs or whatever that are enslaved, and basically their job is to jump in one bucket when it's at the top so that it goes down so that it can carry, the Draconians or whoever up. And at one point there's this fight that takes place in this crude elevator system where they're fighting, and like a Draconian, they've got wings, jumps up and like clambers into the bucket, and it's swinging, and they're fighting each other in this close contained space and whatnot. And I'm going back to that as a D&D player. I'm picturing it as a session and being like, oh, there's some cool thing, like that would have been a fun session. You've got a fight, but it's taking place in a weird scenario. There were probably balancing rules taking place because people were stumbling around and almost falling out and things like that. Um, yeah. So it was interesting going back and rereading that book with like knowledge of the systems a bit. I mean, probably that book was written prior to any, like I started playing in 3.5, and I'm guessing this book was written prior to 3.5, these books, because they were in the 80s. Um, and I didn't start playing D&D until 2005 ish, 2005 or 6, somewhere around there. Um, so I don't know if these would have been first or second edition D&D, but still, um, based on a framework that I recognize. And there's also like there are actions that some of the characters take that I'm going like, yeah, that was a player making a choice that led to this, because the books I think are like the authors played in a campaign, and then they wrote that the act like the contents of that campaign, including the characters. The characters are based on people's player characters. Wrote that into a novel, and so there are definitely things where I'm like, yep, that was a player's decision there to do that. Which edition did you start with? 2016 fifth might have been out by then. Was it fourth or fifth? Because I started with, like, I think I started right as it was sort of bordering between third edition and 3.5. Fifth was out, but you started very briefly in 3.5. Okay. Um, 3.5 is interesting. 3. Like I think I recently picked up a bundle of like a bunch of Pathfinder books, because Pathfinder is more based on 3.5. 3.5 was interesting in that there were so many books that you could pick from. Um, to build your characters and do whatever. And there were so many feats and whatever, like so many class options, and there were prestige classes. Um, so you could, there were just bizarre combinations of characters that you could create, and you could do so much with it, but it was not balanced at all. And even one book to another book were not balanced against each other at all, and they were written by different authors with different visions of what was going on. So stuff didn't necessarily mix well, or like the game, like you were able to cross class and multi-class and things like that. um, and then prestige classes, like I mentioned, kind of, you had requirements, and so you could take a class from this book and mix it with a class from that book that weren't written to go together, that could come up with some pretty broken stuff as a result of them. It was all based on your DM allowing you to do that. Um, but if you had a lenient DM that said, yeah, go with whatever, then you could come up with some, I don't know, some stuff that was either way too strong or way too weak. And even in like just the player's handbook, the classes in 3.5 were not balanced well. Like if you compared a monk or a fighter to a wizard or a cleric or a druid, monk and the fighter did not hold up well to these like spell casting classes once you got past like fifth level. Um, so I don't know, but you could come up with some really interesting characters. Um, I did not enjoy fourth. I'm one of those people that I tried it. I played a little bit of it. I am glad that I didn't buy any of the books, because it just felt too video gamey. It was like your character got broken down into what felt like a bunch of buttons that you would press that had cooldowns. Like it really felt like they were trying to take D&D and make it like World of Warcraft or a game like that, where you've got all these abilities that are on cooldowns, and you're like, okay, I press this button and this is what happens. And I don't know, something about the way that ended up, it just didn't feel right to me. Like Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. It was, yeah, and so 3.5 was like that. 3.5 was very number crunchy. Um, but, yeah. But I enjoy fifth quite a lot. Fifth feels very much like they've done a much better job at balancing it. It's much more difficult to come up with a broken character. Um, and it's much easier to go, okay, well, if I do some of this and some of that and put that together, then you'll end up with a character that's fun and, works. Um, yeah, their next thing that they're kind of in the process of transitioning to it now. They're not calling it sixth, although I'm sure in 2 years' time, everyone, including Wizards of the Coast, is going to just be calling it sixth. I think they're currently calling it D&D Next or something, or they've got some, you know, it's not sixth edition. It's whatever, and it's supposed to be somewhat backwards compatible with fifth, so it's probably actually going to be more like 5.5. Yeah, and you don't have to stick with D&D, of course. There's lots of other systems, and some of them are much more, you know, storytelling friendly than D&D, because at its core, D&D is a tactical game, right? Um, fifth encourages theater of the mind more, but it's still, it's based on a grid system. It's based on top down, looking at a grid, move 30 feet, attack within 5 feet of you, or 10 or whatever. Um, and I expect that it will probably almost always be that D&D. Um, so there's definitely much more open and unconstrained systems. Even Exalted does not work well on a grid because um, your characters can do too much to be confined to a grid. You could build a character that can move miles in a single turn. So it doesn't, you've got to kind of, you can't really play with a grid with Exalted. I mean, you could if all of the characters were not hyper mobile characters, but it's much more descriptive, and it rewards you. That's something I liked about Exalted is it rewards you for being more descriptive in your turn, in that the more descriptive you are of what your character's doing, the more bonus dice you get, and in the more recent edition, it's not just bonus dice you get, like basically like some mana recovery kind of, which can be really important. So it really encourages you to go beyond just I hit it with my sword, or whatever when you're in combat. And also, the same descriptiveness can get you bonus dice outside of combat too. If you're in like a social scenario or whatever, and you describe really well how your character is approaching that, you can get bonus dice towards that type of action too. So I like that. I like characters being incentivized to be more descriptive, which D&D doesn't really. I guess fifth has something, right? Fifth has inspiration. You can get inspiration dice, and that's sort of similar, but it's not to the same extent. So, anyways, how about this book? Has Mr. Sharkey caught up on our Casino Royale adventure in the previous on Wednesday's stream? That was an entertaining. It's so it's weird reading a book without chapters in it, being like, how do I describe the previous episode? What are you doing over there? Because last time Mr. Has got up. It was an entertaining chapter. You have 3 notes. I would like to hear them. I kind of, after we finished it, I was going, oh, he's going to enjoy this one. Words have sex in foreign parts. The old masculine river. Yeah, so last time Desiderata says it's decadent. That's good, is it? Naniog has never been to a city before. Granny Weatherwax has been to Ankh-Morpork, but I guess Naniog has not. Granny Weatherwax had a vague idea that decadent had something to do with not opening the curtains all day. Oh, right. She dismissed the possibility that it meant having 10 teeth, in the same sense that Naniog, for example, was unident. That is a great line. So Granny dozed off, and Nanny went in search of adventure, which, as it turned out, meant getting... It's interesting, there's Card Sharp is someone who scams people with cards, but I'm pretty sure that also Card Shark means the same thing. And I wonder if it's one of those things like where it started in the UK or someplace as Card Sharp, and then somebody misheard it as Card Shark, and that stuck. Because it also kind of makes sense, right? As this, like, lurking presence that's gonna bite you. That one, you appreciated Farmos' comment on Old Man River. Headology check. Proficiency plus charisma modifier. Yeah, it would make sense as its own skill, because, like, what else would it fit under? I always forget which skills 5th edition always has. I always forget which skills 5th edition has as its baseline. Garkon. Good name for a TTRPG character. Card Sharp, but Pool Shark. But then they get confused. Pool Shark, I guess, makes sense because pool, as in a pool of water. But I wouldn't be surprised if it started with one and then got morphed into the other. Let's see. So 5th edition has acrobatics, animal handling, arcana, athletics, deception, history, insight, intimidation, investigation, medicine, nature, perception, performance, persuasion. See, the thing with Granny's headology is it seems to me like it would be different uses of a variety of different skills there. Echo. Lego my Echo, yeah. Yeah, I definitely was also thinking of Eggo waffles. Like, part of headology would be deception. Part would probably be insight. I was going to say perception, but it's probably not perception. It's probably insight. So it would be like a combination of deception, insight, persuasion, like and a little bit of performance. Depending on what you're doing, I'd say it could be a combination of those 4 skills. Intimidation. Intimidation would be a witch not having to pay for things, I think. I don't know if that falls under headology. Broadly, it might. I suppose there are edge cases where intimidation covers it, but... But yeah, if you were making a character that was headology focused, I feel like you would need all of those skills. You would want proficiency in, or at least points in all of those. Um, Deception is charisma, insight is wisdom, intimidation is charisma. Although intimidation is one of those ones where I'm like, it's charisma unless it's not. You could have a strength based intimidation if you intimidate by punching a hole in a wall. Someone believes the magic works because they're scared to tell the witch otherwise. Let's see. Performance is charisma. Persuasion is charisma. Yeah, you'd want a charisma-focused character with wisdom. It would be a charisma and wisdom mix character, which sounds like a paladin, right? No, paladin's just charisma, I think. Paladins don't need wisdom. Actually, I'm not sure what a bard. Probably a bard, realistically. Yeah, paladin's charisma strength, yeah, or toughness, or whatever. So I play sometimes with friends Warhammer 40k, which is, one of those money sink hobbies of like you got to buy all the models and paints and whatnot, right? And terrain and but the like the orcs in Warhammer have a very interesting like lore. They've got a very interesting lore where it's like the orcs have these big rickety machines that are smashed together from whatever they've salvaged from wherever. And they've got these big clunky guns or what have you. And you'll get the Imperium of Man, and like after a battle, if a space marine goes and picks up an orc gun, it won't work. Like it doesn't work because it shouldn't work because the machinery doesn't make sense. But the reason that it works when an orc's holding it and shooting it is because the orcs believe it should work. And the more numbers of orcs believe something, the more true it becomes. So there used to be an actual rule in previous editions of Warhammer. I don't think it's there anymore, but they make allusions to it occasionally, where there used to be an actual rule where if you had like an orc war buggy, which is like basically just a jeep, if you painted it red, it would gain extra distance on its movement because red vehicles go faster. Because orcs believe that red ones go faster. So there was an actual rule where if you had painted your model red, it would get an extra inch or something of movement. And I think orc magic, there's, some magic in the game too. I think it works in the similar way. It works because they believe it works. It should work. Let's see. I think that's why a lot of witches' magical style reminds you of your D&D character as a sorcerer. That's probably based on the individual witch. I think most of them would be closest to us. Well, I mean, they don't really actually do very much obvious magic. They did some in the previous book. They've done a little in this book, not much, mostly flying on brooms and using the wand. I think that's about all they've actually done as far as magic in this book. But, I mean, and they can do magic. Oh, and the far sight through mirrors. That would be the third thing. I guess Lilith has done some magic, but we haven't seen much of it directly. Alright. I should actually get back to this book. It's already 7:35. So Nanny gambled away all their money, and then Granny went and gambled it back. What? Why'd your tail go down? You're starving? Never been... Oh, I dropped it. Never been fed. Move this way a little. Yeah. So there was the whole gambling scene, which went on for quite a long time, but it was great, so worth it. And then that's where we left off. In my copy, we're on page 130. So, here we go. Dear Jason and everyone, what you get more of in foreign parts is smells, and I'm getting good at them. Esme is shouting at everyone. I think she thinks they're being foreign just to spite her. Don't know when I last saw her enjoy herself so much. Mind you, they need a good shaking up if you ask me. For lunch we stopped somewhere, and they did steak tartare, and they acted very snooty just because I wanted mine well done. All the best, Mum. Just because I wanted mine well done. Steak tartare. The moon was closer here. The orbit of the Discworld's moon meant that it was quite high when it passed over the high ramtops. Here, nearer to the rim, it was bigger and more orange. Like a pumpkin, said Nanny Og. I thought we said we weren't going to mention pumpkins, said Magrat. Well, we didn't have any supper, said Nanny. And there was another thing. Except during the height of summer, the witches weren't used to warm nights. It didn't seem right, gliding along under a big orange moon under dark foliage that clicked and buzzed and whirred with insects. We must be far enough from the river now, said Magrat. Can't we land, Granny? No one could have followed us. Granny Weatherwax looked down. The river in this countryside meandered in huge, glistening curves, taking 20 miles to cover 5. That's how you get oxbow lakes. The land between the snaking water was a patchwork of hillsides and woodlands. A distant glow might have been Genua itself. Riding a broomstick all night is a right pain in the itinerant, said Nanny. Oh, all right. There's a town over there, said Magrat, and a castle. Oh, not another one. It's a nice little castle, said Magrat. Can't we just call in? I'm fed up with inns. Granny looked down. She had very good night vision. Are you sure that's a castle? She said. I can see the turrets and everything, said Magrat. Of course it's a castle. I can see more than turrets, said Granny. I think we'd better have a look at this, Githa. There was never any noise in the sleeping castle, except in the late summer when ripe berries fell off the bramble vines and burst softly on the floor. And sometimes birds would try to nest in the thorn thickets that now filled the throne room from floor to ceiling. But they never got very far before they, too, fell asleep. Apart from that, you'd need very keen hearing indeed to hear the growth of shoots and the opening of buds. It had been like this for 10 years. There was no sound in the "Open up there!" "Bona fide travelers seeking succor." No sound in the "Here, give us a leg up, Magrat. Right. Now." There was a tinkle of broken glass. "You've broken their window." Not a sound in the "You'll have to offer to pay for it, you know." The castle gate swung open slowly. Just the narrator getting frustrated with this is... Nanny-Og peered around it at the other two witches, while pulling thorns and burrs from her hair. Oh, I guess that was a Nanny-Og saying, "Here, give us a leg up, Magrat." "It's bloody disgusting in here," she said. "There's people asleep all over the place, with spiders' webs all over 'em. You were right, Esme. There's been magic going on." The witches pushed their way through the overgrown castle. They're interrupting the story? Dust and leaves had covered the carpets. Young sycamores were making a spirited attempt to take over the courtyard. Vines festooned every wall. Granny Weatherwax pulled a slumbering soldier to his feet. Dust billowed off his clothes. "Wake up!" she demanded. "Fzzzt," said the soldier, and slumped back. "It's like that everywhere," said Magrat, fighting her way through a thicket of bracken that was growing up from the kitchen regions. "There's the cooks all snoring, and nothing but mold in the pots. There's even mice asleep in the pantry." Said Nanny. "There'll be a spinning wheel at the bottom of all this, you mark my words." "A Black Alice job," said Nanny-Og. "That's weird. There's like two Nanny. I suspect that was supposed to be Granny saying there'll be a spinning wheel at the bottom of all this. It says in my copy it says said Nat. Yours says Granny. Mine says, yeah, it makes sense to be Granny, but mine says said Nanny, and then right afterwards said Nanny-Og for the next line. So mine's actually wrong there, I feel like. So that should be a said Granny. "There'll be a spinning wheel at the bottom of all this. You mark my words." "A Black Alice job," said Nanny-Og. "Looks like it," said Granny. Then she added, quietly, "or someone like her." "Now there was a witch who knew how stories worked," said Nanny. "She used to be in as many as 3 of 'em at once." Even Magrat knew about Black Alice, spelled A-L-I-S-S. She was said to have been the greatest witch who ever lived. Not exactly bad, but so powerful it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. When it came to sending palaces to sleep for 100 years, or getting princesses to spin straw into glod, no one did it better than Black Alice. Footnote. Black Alice wasn't very good with words either. They had to give her quite a lot of money to go away and not make a scene. End of footnote. I don't understand. I guess about the Glod thing? I met her once, said Nanny, as they climbed the castle's main staircase, which was a cascade of old man's trousers. Is that a plant? Poor Glod. Old Deliria Skibley took me to see her once, when I was a girl. Of course, she was getting pretty eccentric by then. Gingerbread houses, that kind of thing. She spoke sadly, as one might talk about an elderly relative who'd taken to wearing her underwear outside her clothes. That must have been before those two children shut her up in her own oven, said Magrat, untangling her sleeve from a briar. Yeah, sad that. I mean, she didn't really ever eat anyone, said Nanny. Well, not often. I mean, there was talk, but... That's what happens, said Granny. You get too involved with stories, you get confused. You don't know what's really real and what isn't. And they get you in the end. They send you weird in the head. I don't like stories. They're not real. I don't like things that ain't real. She pushed open a door. Ah, a chamber, she said sourly. Could even be a bower. Doesn't the stuff grow quickly? Said Magrat. Part of the time spell, said Granny. Ah, there she is. Knew there'd be someone somewhere. There was a figure lying on a bed in a thicket of rose bushes. And there's the spinning wheel, said Nanny, pointing to a shape just visible in a clump of ivy. Don't touch it, said Granny. Don't worry. I'll pick it up by the treadle and pitch it out the window. How do you know all this? Said Magrat. 'Cause it's a rural myth, said Nanny. It's happened lots of times. I love that. They're like, they walk into a castle, everyone's asleep, and they're like, yep, a spinning wheel did this. And Nanny decides she's just going to chuck it out a window. Like, that's part of the solution. Granny Weatherwax and Magrat looked down at the sleeping figure of a girl of about 13, almost silvery under the dust and pollen. Isn't she pretty? Sighed Magrat, the generous-hearted. From behind them came the crash of a spinning wheel on some distant cobbles, and then Nanny Ogg appeared, brushing her hands. Seen it happen a dozen times, she said. No, you ain't, said Granny. Once, anyway, said Nanny, unabashed. And I heard about it dozens of times. Everyone has. Rural myth, like I said. Everyone's heard about it happening in their cousins, friends, neighbours' village. That's because it does, said Granny. Granny picked up the girl's wrist. She's asleep because she'll have got Nanny said. Granny turned. I know, right? I know as well as you. You think I don't know? She bent over the limp hand. That's fairy godmothering, this is, she had added, half to herself. Always do it impressively. Always meddling, always trying to be in control. Ha! Someone got a bit of poison. Send everyone to sleep for 100 years. Do it the easy way. All this for one prick. As if that was the end of the world. She paused. Nanny Ogg was standing behind her. There was no possible way she could have detected her expression. "Githa?" "Yes, Esme?" said Nanny Ogg innocently. "I can feel you grinnin'. You can save the tuppenny halfpenny psychology for them as wants it." Granny shut her eyes and muttered a few words. "Shall I use my wand?" said Magrat hesitantly. "Don't you dare," said Granny, and went back to her muttering. Nanny nodded. "She's definitely getting a bit of her color back," she said. A few minutes later, the girl opened her eyes and stared blearily at Granny Weatherwax. "Time to get up," said Granny in an unusually cheerful voice. "You're missing the better part of the decade." I didn't know how to do unusually cheerful Granny Weatherwax, so that's my best shot. The girl tried to focus on Nanny, then on Magrat, and then looked back at Granny Weatherwax. "You?" she said. Granny raised her eyebrows and looked at the other two. "Me?" "You are still here?" "Still?" said Granny. "Never been here before in my life, miss." "But—" The girl looked bewildered. And frightened, Magrat noticed. "I'm like that myself in the mornings, dear," said Nanny Ogg, taking the girl's other hand and patting it. "Never at my best till I've had a cup of tea. I expect everyone else will be waking up any minute. Of course, it'll take 'em a while to clean the rats' nests out of the kettles. Esme?" Granny was staring at a dust-covered shape on the wall. "Meddling," she whispered. "What's up, Esme?" "Granny Weatherwax." Undead Man Walking says, names? Hi? Tom Ground? I'm Sleet. We're reading Witches Abroad. Welcome. Yes, it is. Yeah. Love me some Discworld. Have you read this particular book before? Have you read any of the Witches books? It's two old witches and one younger witch that are traveling abroad from their homes in this one. And one of them has been made into a fairy godmother. The Skullduggery Pleasant books. That sounds familiar, but I haven't read them myself. Are you reading them now, or are they just a series that you like? Irish Skeleton Wizard Detective. I have read, what's it called? The Dresden Files, the Dresden Codex, whatever. Which is about a wizard detective, about a wizard PI. But he's not a skeleton, and I think he's from Chicago. Or at least he lives in Chicago. His covers look fun. That sounds really entertaining. That sounds like a great series. That series does covers, right? Oh, let me take a look. Skullduggery Pleasant. Yep. Yep, that's beautiful. Very, like, film noir PI, but as a skeleton. Some good hard-boiled fun. Which is something that I do kind of like about the Dresden books. It's like the author, I think, has said that they were never like he just wrote them to write a series. Like they were never his, favorite books to write or anything, but they're just pulp fiction, like entertainment in that way. So they're kind of fun just as a like take it for what it is. He's a wizard and he's a PI, and it plays with both of those sides of stories. But that sounds probably similar in nature. I need to go back and there was a period of time where none of the like he didn't write any new Dresden books for a while, but I think a bunch have come out since the last time I read them, and I need to go back and see where that series has gone. I do a good job of the voice of a skeletal detective. How someone wrote 15 books off of Irish skeleton wizard fights crime. Yeah, that sounds fun. All right, I'm going to read a little more of this. But yeah, please stick around. If you are a fan of Pratchett, this is a great book. And we're, a quarter of the way in? Maybe a third. We've read maybe a third of it. Not all tonight. I'm here Wednesdays and Fridays. And there's a puppy. What are you doing? Coming looking for snacks. Come say hello to Tom. This is Bin, aka Binabic, aka Bin Binakegabinic. He likes it when I'm reading because that means he gets snacks. He slimed my finger. The Binabine, Bin Binakegabon Bean. He's named after a character from a different book. Yeah. Yes, he is. Alright, where was I? Granny Weatherwax strode across the room and wiped the dust off a huge ornate mirror. Ha! She said, and spun around. We'll be going now, she said. Save that for later. Will do. Quotes, it looks like. I see. But I thought we were going to have a rest. I mean, it's nearly dawn, said Magrat. No sense in outstaying our welcome, said Granny, as she left the room. But we haven't even had a... Magrat began. She glanced at the mirror. It was a big, oval one, in a gilt frame. It looked perfectly normal. It wasn't like Granny Weatherwax to be frightened of her own reflection. She's in one of her moods again, said Nanny Og. Come on, no sense in staying here. She patted the bewildered princess on the head. Cheerio, miss. A couple of weeks with a broom and an axe, and you'll soon have the old place looking like new. She looked as if she recognized Granny, said Magrat, as they followed the stiff, hurrying figure of Esme Weatherwax down the stairs. Well, we know she doesn't, don't we? Said Nanny Og. Esme has never been in these parts in her life. But I still don't see why we have to rush off, Magrat persisted. I expect people will be jolly grateful that we've broken the spell and everything. The rest of the palace was waking up. They jogged past guards, staring in amazement at their cobwebbed uniforms, and the bushes that were growing everywhere. As they crossed the forested courtyard, an older man in faded robes staggered out of a doorway and leaned against the wall, trying to get his bearings. Then he saw the accelerating figure of Granny Weatherwax. "You!" he shouted, and "Guards!" Nanny Og didn't hesitate. She snatched Magrat's elbow and broke into a run, catching up with Granny Weatherwax at the castle gates. A guard who was better at mornings than his colleague I guess it is morning. That's a guard who was better at mornings than his colleague staggered forward and made an attempt to bar their way with his pike. But Granny just pushed at it and swiveled him around gently. Then they were outside and running for the broomsticks leaning against a convenient tree. Granny snatched at hers without stopping, and for once it fired up on almost the first attempt. An arrow whiffled past her hat and stuck in a branch. "I don't call that gratitude," said Magrat, as the brooms glided up and over the trees. "A lot of people are never at their best just after waking up," said Nanny. "Everyone seemed to think they knew you, Granny," said Magrat. Granny's broomstick jerked in the wind. "They didn't!" she shouted. "They never saw me before, all right!" They flew on in troubled silence for a while. Glided always sounds like it's the wrong word. I think it should be glid. Yeah, I can see that. Which you're pretty sure it isn't. I'm also pretty sure it isn't glid. I don't think glid is a word. Glowed. They glowed along. Glidden. Jesse Kuma. Yes, glidden. They had glidden. They had been gliddening for quite a long time. Glaive? Alright, now we're getting a little far afield. Glaive? Get out of here. Glade, maybe. Except that's a word for a nice little field, you know? Preferably encircled by trees. Yes, good. Glod! Ah, now we all know that Glod is a dwarf. Or many dwarfs at this point. Then Magrat, who in Nanny Og's opinion had an innocent talent for treading on dangerous ground, and he is a dwarf and he's digging a hole. Glod, glod, glod. Magrat, who had an innocent talent for treading on dangerous ground, said, "I wonder if we did the right thing. I'm sure it was a job for a handsome prince." You're digging a hole. "Ha!" said Granny, who was riding ahead. "And what good would that be? Cutting your way through a bit of bramble is how you can tell he's going to be a good husband, is it? That's fairy godmotherly thinking, that is."
Going around inflicting happy endings on people, whether they wants them or not, eh?
There's nothing wrong with happy endings, said Magrat hotly.
Listen, happy endings is fine if they turn out happy,
said Granny, glaring at the sky.
But you can't make 'em for other people. Like, the only way you could make a happy marriage is by cutting their heads off as soon as they say, I do, yes? You can't make happiness.
Dog! As he licks his chops.
Rock and stone. You can't make happiness.
Granny Weatherwax stared at the distant city.
All you can do, she said, is make an ending.
It's ominous. Did someone say dig? They had breakfast in a forest clearing. It was grilled pumpkin. The dwarf bread was brought out for inspection. But it was miraculous, the dwarf bread. No one ever went hungry when they had some dwarf bread to avoid. You only had to look at it for a moment, and instantly you could think of dozens of things you'd rather eat. Your boots, for example. Mountains, raw sheep, your own foot. Then they tried to get some sleep. At least, Nanny and Magrat did. But all it meant was that they lay awake and listened to Granny Weatherwax muttering under her breath. They'd never seen her so upset. Afterward, Nanny suggested that they walk for a while. It was a nice day, she said. This was an interesting kind of forest, she said, with lots of new herbs, which could do with being looked at. Everyone would feel better for a stroll in the sunshine, she said. It'd improve their tempers. And it was, indeed, a nice forest. After half an hour or so, even Granny Weatherwax was prepared to admit that in certain respects, it wasn't totally foreign and shoddy. Magrat wandered off the path occasionally, picking flowers. Nanny even sang a few verses of A Wizard's Staff Has a Knob on the End, with no more than a couple of token protests from the other two. But there was still something wrong. Nanny Ogg and Magrat could feel something between them and Granny Weatherwax. Some sort of mental wall. Something important deliberately hidden and unsaid. How many licks does it take to get to the center of a femur? Witches usually had few secrets from one another, if only because they were all so nosy that there was never any chance to have secrets. It was worrying. It's okay. I like the conversation too. Oh boy, here we go. And then they turned a corner by a stand of huge oak trees and met the little girl in the red cloak. Not even being subtle anymore after that sleeping castle. She was skipping along in the middle of the path, singing a song that was simpler and a good deal cleaner than any in Nanny Ogg's repertoire. She didn't see the witches until she was almost on top of them. She stopped, and then smiled innocently. "Hello, old women," she said. "Ahem," said Magrat. Granny Weatherwax bent down.
"What are you doing out in the forest all by yourself, young lady?"
"I'm taking this basket of goodies to my granny," said the girl. Granny straightened up, a faraway look in her eyes.
"That's me,"
said Nanny Og urgently.
I know,
said Granny. Magrat leaned down and set her face in the idiot grimace generally used by adults who'd love to be good with children and don't stand a dog's chance of ever achieving it. Tell me, miss, did your mother tell you to watch out for any bad wolves that might happen to be in the vicinity?" "That's right." "And your granny," said Nanny Og, "I guess she's a bit bedbound at the moment, right?" "That's why I'm taking her this basket of goodies," the child began. "Thought so." "Do you know my granny?" said the child.
"Yes,"
said Granny Weatherwax.
"in a way."
"It happened over Scund Way when I was a girl," said Nanny Og quietly. "They never even found the Gran." Little Red Riding Hood would be a terrifying story to realize you're in the middle of. Like, unless you're a huntsman, and even then it's like you're going to see some stuff you wish you hadn't. So,
"And where is your granny's cottage, little girl?"
said Granny Weatherwax loudly, nudging Nanny sharply in the ribs. Also, I like how even Magrat knows what's happening here. The girl pointed up a side track. "You're not the Wicked Witch, are you?" she said. Nanny Og coughed.
"Me? No. We're...
Granny began. "Fairies," said Magrat. Granny Weatherwax's mouth dropped open. Such an explanation would never have occurred to her. "Only my mummy warned me about the Wicked Witch, too," said the girl. She gave Magrat a sharp look. "What kind of fairies?" Flower fairies?" said Magrat. "Look, I've got a wand." "Which ones?" "What? Which flowers?" This little girl is sharp. Said Magrat. "Well, I'm Fairy Tulip, and that's..." She avoided looking directly at Granny. "Fairy Daisy, and this is..." "Fairy Hedgehog," said Nanny Og. This addition to the supernatural pantheon was given due consideration. "You can't be Fairy Hedgehog," said the child, after some thought. "A hedgehog's not a flower." "How do you know?" "'Cause it's got spikes." "So's holly. And thistles." "Oh." "And I've got a wand," said Magrat. Only now did she risk a look at Fairy Daisy.
"We ought to be getting along,"
said Granny Weatherwax.
"You just stay here with Fairy Tulip, I think it was, and we'll just go and make sure your granny's all right. All right?"
"I bet it's not a real wand," said the child. ignoring her and facing Magrat with a child's unerring ability to find a weak link in any chain. I bet it can't turn things into things. Well, Magrat began. I bet, said the girl. I bet you can't turn that tree stump over there into a pumpkin. Ha ha! Bet you anything you can't. Bet you $1 trillion you can't turn that stump into a pumpkin. I can see the two of you are going to get along fine, said Fairy Hedgehog. We won't be long. 2 broomsticks skimmed low above the forest path. Could just be a coincidence, said Nanny Og.
Tain't,
said Granny.
The child even has a red cloak on.
I had a red cloak when I was 15, said Nanny.
Yes, but your granny lived next door. You didn't have to worry about wolves when you visited her,
said Granny. Except old Sumpkins the lodger.
Yes, but that was just coincidence.
A trail of blue smoke drifted among the trees ahead of them. Somewhere away to one side, there was the sound of a falling tree. Woodcutters, said Nanny. It's all right if there's woodcutters. One of them rushes in.
That's only what children get told,
said Granny, as they sped onward.
Anyway, that's no good to the grandmother, is it? She's already been it.
I always hated that story, said Nanny. No one ever cares what happens to poor defenseless old women. The path vanished abruptly on the edge of a glade. A glade! We were just talking about glades and glodes and gloves and glubs. They glade into the glade. They glidden their way down. They glittered right into the glade. Because they're fairies. Hemmed in by the trees. Glade. Surrounded by trees. What did I say? Hemmed in by the trees was a straggly kitchen garden, in which a few pathetic stalks fought for what little sun there was. They glat into the glade. That sounds like it ended really abruptly. Glat. In the middle of the garden was what had to be a thatched cottage, because no one would build a haystack that badly. They leapt off the broomsticks, leaving them to drift to a halt in the bushes, and hammered on the cottage door. We could be too late, said Nanny. The wolf might. After a while, thank you. I was waiting for that. After a while, there was the muffled sound of someone shuffling across the floor within, and then the door opened a crack. A suspicious eye was visible in the gloom. Yes, said a small and quavering voice from somewhere beneath the eye.
Are you grandmother?
Granny Weatherwax demanded. Are you the tax gatherers, dear?
No, ma'am. We're
fairies, said Fairy Hedgehog quickly. I don't open the door to people I don't know, dear, said the voice, and then it took on a slightly petulant tone. Especially people who never does the washing up, even after I leaves out a bowl of nearly fresh milk for 'em. Fairies. right?
We'd like to talk to you for a few minutes, said Fairy Daisy.
Yes? Have you got any identification, dear? I know we've got the right grandmother, said Fairy Hedgehog. There's a family likeness. She's got big ears.
Look, it's not her that's got the big ears,
Snapped Fairy Daisy.
It'll be the wolf that's got big ears. That's the whole point. Don't you ever pay attention?
The grandmother watched them with interest. After a lifetime of believing in them, she was seeing fairies for the first time, and it was an experience. Granny Weatherwax caught her perplexed expression.
Put it like this, ma'am,
She said, in a despotically reasonable tone of voice.
How would you like to be eaten alive by a wolf?
I don't think I would like that. Dear, no,
said the hidden grandmother.
The alternative's us,
said Granny.
Lox, are you sure?
Lox.
On our word as fairies,
said Fairy Hedgehog.
Well, really? All right, you can come in, but none of your tricks. And mind you do the washing up. You haven't got a pot of gold about you, have you? That's pixies, isn't it?
No, they're the ones in wells. It's goblins she means.
Don't be daft. They're the ones you get under bridges.
That's trolls. Everyone knows that's trolls.
On us, anyway.
Oh, said the grandmother, I might have known. Boy, how's everybody holding up? We've got a sort of a mid-scene break here, but I am also good to continue if people would like to. Excuse me. My voice doing it's kind of all over the place, isn't it? Making it as quaverly as I can, but that means a lot of up and down and a little bit of left and right. It's breaking a bunch, oh boy. That's not breaking, that's quavering. It's quaverly. Not over quavered. I am a little hungry though. I'm looking at some of these quotes from Skullduggery Pleasant. What do you think, Sharkies? You're good to go ahead a bit? There are more breaks. Oh, yeah, there are. All right, let's go a bit further then. Magrat, did you just come in here and wink at me? comes up those stairs and stops there so purposefully, like, I'm running out of race cake spin. Magrat liked to think she was good with children, and worried that she wasn't. She didn't like them very much, and worried about this too. Nanny Ogg seemed to be effortlessly good with children by alternately and randomly giving them either a sweet or a thick ear. A thick ear? A sweet or a thick ear? Does that mean, like, twisting their ear? Does that... What's a thick ear? What's a thick ear, Ben? By alternately and randomly giving them either a sweet or a thick ear. While Granny Weatherwax ignored them for most of the time, and that seemed to work just as well. I see. It's a smack. Whereas Magrat cared. It didn't seem fair. Bet you $1,000,000,000,000,000,000 that you can't turn that bush into a pumpkin, said the child. But look, all the others got turned into pumpkins, Magrat pointed out. It's bound not to work sooner or later, said the child placidly. Magrat looked helplessly at the wand. She'd tried everything. Wishing, sub-vocalizing, and even, when she'd thought the other witches were out of earshot, banging it against things and shouting, "Anything but pumpkins!" You don't know how to do it really, do you? Stated the child. Tell me, said Magrat, you said your mummy knows about the big bad wolf in the woods, didn't you? That's right. But nevertheless, she sent you out by yourself to take those goodies to your granny? That's right. Why? Nothing. Just thinking. And you owe me $1,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000, There's a certain Freemasonry about grandmothers, with the added benefit that no one has to stand on one leg or recite any oaths in order to join. Once inside the cottage, and with a kettle on the boil, Nanny Ogg was quite at home. Grebo stretched out in front of the meagre fire and dozed off as the witches tried to explain.
I don't see how a wolf can get in here, dear, said the grandmother kindly. I mean, they're wolves. They can't open doors.
Granny Weatherwax twitched aside a rag of curtain and glared out at the clearing.
We know,
she said. Nanny Ogg nodded toward the little bed in an alcove by the fireplace. Is that where you always sleep? She said.
When I'm feeling poorly, dear. Other times I sleeps in the attic.
I should get along up there now if I was you. And take my cat up with you, will you? We don't want him getting in the way.
Is this the bit where you clean the house and do all the washing for a saucer of milk? Said the grandmother hopefully.
Could be. You never know.
Funny, dear. I was expecting you to be shorter.
We get out in the fresh air a lot, said Nanny. Off you go now. That left the two of them. Granny Weatherwax looked around the cave-like room. The rushes on the floor were well on the way to composthood. Soot encrusted the cobwebs on the ceiling. The only way housework could be done in this place was with a shovel, or, for preference, a match. Burninating!
Funny, really?
Said Nanny, when the old woman had climbed the rickety stairs.
She's younger than me. Mind you, I take exercise.
You never took exercise in your life,
said Granny Weatherwax, still watching the bushes.
You never did anything you didn't want to do.
That's what I mean,
said Nanny happily.
Look, Esme, I still say this could all be just...
It ain't. I can feel the story. Someone's been making stories happen in these parts, I know it.
And you know who, too, don't you, Esme?
Said Nanny slyly. She saw Granny look around wildly at the grubby walls.
I reckon she's too poor to afford a mirror,
said Nanny.
I ain't blind, Esme, and I know mirrors and fairy godmothers go together. So what's going on?
I ain't saying. I don't want to look a fool if I'm wrong. I'm not going to. There's something coming.
Nanny Og pressed her nose against the dirty window.
Can't see anything.
The bushes moved. Get into the bed.
Me? I thought it was you who was going into the bed.
Can't imagine why you'd think that.
No. Come to think of it, neither can I,
said Nanny wearily. She picked up the floppy mob cap from the bedpost, put it on, and slid under the patchwork quilt.
There! This mattress is stuffed with straw.
You won't have to lie on it for long.
It prickles, and I think there's things in it.
Something bumped against the wall of the house. The witches fell silent. And the trogdor comes in the night! There was a snuffling noise under the back door.
You know,
whispered Nanny as they waited,
the scullery's terrible. There's no firewood, and there's hardly any food. And there's a jug of milk that's practically on the march.
Granny sidled quickly across the room to the fireplace, and then back to her station by the front door. After a moment, there was a scrabbling at the latch, as if it was being operated by someone who was unfamiliar either with doors or with fingers. The door creaked open slowly. There was an overwhelming smell of musk and wet fur. Uncertain footsteps tottered across the floor and tottered across the floor and toward the figure huddling under the bedclothes. Nanny raised the mob cap's floppy frill just enough to see out.
"Watcha!"
she said, and then,
"Oh, blimey! I never realized you had teeth that big."
Granny Weatherwax pushed the door shut and stepped forward briskly. The wolf spun around, a paw raised protectively.
Noah!
Noah! I don't know who or what that's supposed to be. Nooaaaaaaw. I suspect it's supposed to be the wolf. So which should probably sound much more growly and
Noah!
something like that. Granny hesitated for a second, and then hit it very hard on the head with a cast iron frying pan. The wolf crumpled. Nanny Ogg swung her legs out of the bed. When it happened over Scund way, they said it was a werewolf or something. And I thought, no, werewolves aren't like that, she said. I never thought it was a real wolf. Gives me quite a turn, that.
Real wolves don't walk on their hind legs and open doors,
said Granny Weatherwax.
Come on, help me get it outside.
Took me right back, seeing a great big hairy slathering thing heading toward me, said Nanny, picking up one end of the stunned creature. Did you ever meet old Sumpkins? It was indeed a normal-looking wolf, except that it was a lot thinner than most. Ribs showed plainly under the skin, and the fur was matted. Granny hauled a bucket of cloudy water from the well next to the privy, and poured it over its head. The well next to the privy. Oh, a bad combo. Then she sat down on a tree stump and watched it carefully. A few birds sang high in the branches.
It spoke,
she said.
It tried to say no.
I wondered about that, said Nanny, and I thought maybe I was imagining things.
No point in imagining anything,
said Granny.
Things are bad enough as they are.
The wolf groaned. Granny handed the frying pan to Nanny Ogg. After a while, she said,
I think I'm going to have a look inside its head.
Nanny Ogg shook her head. I wouldn't do that if I was you.
I'm the one who's me, and I've got to know. Just you stand by with the frying pan.
Nanny shrugged. Granny concentrated. It is very difficult to read a human mind. Most humans are thinking about so many things at any given moment that it is almost impossible to pick out one stream in the flood. Animal minds are different, far less cluttered. Carnivore minds are easiest of all, especially before meals. Colors don't exist in the mental world, but if they did, a hungry carnivore mind would be hot and purple and sharp as an arrow. And herbivore minds are simple too, coiled silver springs poised for flight. But this wasn't any kind of normal mind. It was two minds. Granny had sometimes picked up the mind of hunters in the forest, when she was sitting quietly of an evening and letting her mind wander. Just occasionally, they felt like this, or at least like a faint shadow of this. Just occasionally, when the hunter was about to make a kill, the random streams of thought came together. But this was different. This was the opposite. This was cracked and crippled attempts at cogitation peeling away from the sleek arrowhead of predatory intent. This was a predatory mind trying to think. No wonder it was going mad. She opened her eyes. Nanny Ogg held the frying pan over her head. Her arm trembled. Well, she said, who's there?
I could do with a glass of water,
said Granny. Maybe not from that well. Natural caution surfaced through the turmoil of her mind.
Ah, only not out of that well, mind you.
Nanny relaxed a little. When a witch started rummaging in someone else's mind, you could never be sure who was coming back. But Granny Weatherwax was the best. Magrat might always be trying to find herself, But Granny didn't even understand the idea of the search. If she couldn't find the way back to her own head, there wasn't a path.
"There's that milk in the cottage,"
Nanny volunteered.
What color was it again?
"Well, still fairly white."
Okay.
When Nanny Ogg's back was safely turned, Granny permitted herself a small shudder. She stared at the wolf, wondering what she could do for it. A normal wolf wouldn't enter a cottage, even if it could open the door. Wolves didn't come near humans at all, except if there were a lot of them and it was the end of a very hard winter. And they didn't do that because they were big and bad and wicked, but because they were wolves. This wolf was trying to be human. There was probably no cure.
"Here's your milk,"
said Nanny Ogg. Granny reached up and took it without looking.
Someone made this wolf think it was a person,
she said.
They made it think it was a person, and then they didn't think any more about it. It happened a few years ago.
"How do you know?"
I've got its memories,
said Granny. And instincts, too, she thought. She knew it'd be some days before she'd stop wanting to chase sledges over the snow.
"Oh."
It's stuck between species, in its head.
"Can we help it?"
said Nanny. Granny shook her head.
It's gone on for too long. It's habit now. And it's starving. It can't go one way, it can't go t'other. It can't act like a wolf, and it can't manage being a human. And it can't go on like it is.
She turned to face Nanny for the first time. Nanny took a step back.
You can't imagine how it feels,
she said.
Wandering around for years, not capable of acting human, and not able to be a wolf. You can't imagine how that feels.
"I reckon maybe I can,"
said Nanny.
"In your face. Maybe I can. Who'd do that to a creature?"
I've got my suspicions.
They looked around. Magrat was approaching, with the child. Beside them walked one of the woodcutters.
Ha,
said Granny.
Yes, of course. There's always got to be,
she spat the words,
a happy ending.
A paw tried to grip her ankle. Granny Weatherwax looked down into the wolf's face.
Please,
it growled.
An ending. No.
She knelt down and took the paw.
Yes,
she said.
Yes.
She stood up again, all authority, and beckoned to the approaching trio.
Mr. Woodcutter,
she said,
a job for you.
The woodcutter never understood why the wolf laid its head on the stump so readily. Or why the old woman, the one in whom anger roiled like pearl barley in a bubbling stew, insisted afterward that it be buried properly instead of skinned and thrown in the bushes. She had been very insistent about that. And that was the end of the big bad wolf. Seems like kind of a barred place to stop, doesn't it? I'm not sure where the next break's gonna be. Looks like there is one in like 3 pages. Should we finish that up? That was pretty depressing, wasn't it? So if everyone's good, I think I'll go to the next break, which isn't too far away. Far. Very barred, yeah. I think I read barred while I said far. Alright, I'm just going to go a couple more pages. It was an hour later. Quite a few of the woodcutters had wandered up to the cottage, where there seemed to be a lot of interesting activity going on. Woodcutting is not a job that normally offers much in the way of diversion. Maigret was washing the floor with as much magical assistance as could be afforded by a bucket of soapy water and a scrubbing brush. Even Nanny Og, whose desultory interest in the proud role of housewife had faded completely just as soon as her eldest daughter was old enough to hold a duster, was cleaning the walls. Desultory, there's not a word you see often. The old grandmother, who wasn't entirely in touch with events, was anxiously following both of them around with a saucer of milk. Spiders, who had inherited the ceiling for generations, were urged gently but firmly out of the door. And Granny Weatherwax was walking around the clearing with the head woodcutter, a barrel-chested young man who clearly thought he looked better in his studded leather wristlets than was, in fact, the case. Studded leather wristlets.
"It's been around for years, right?" he said. "Always lurking around the edges of villages on that." "And you never tried talking to it?" said Granny. "Talk to it? It's a wolf, right? You don't talk to wolves. Animals can't talk." I see. And what about the old woman? There's a lot of you woodcutters. Did you ever, drop in to see her?" "Huh? No fear."
No fear.
"Why?"
The head woodcutter leaned forward conspiratorially.
"Well, they say she's a witch, right?" "Really?" said Granny. "How do you know?" "She's got all the signs, right?" "What signs are those?"
The woodcutter was pricked by a slight uneasiness.
"Well, she lives all by herself in the wood, right?" "Yes." And she's got a hook nose, and she's always muttering to herself." "Yes." "And she's got no teeth, right?" "Locks," said Granny. "I can see where you wouldn't want to be having with the likes of her, right?" "Right," said the woodcutter, relieved. "Quite likely turn you into just about anything as soon as look as you, right?"
Granny stuck her finger in her ear and twiddled it reflectively.
"They can do that, you know." "I bet they can. I bet they can," said Granny. "Makes me glad there's all you big strong lads around." "Tch, tch. Can I have a look at your chopper, young man?"
He handed over his axe. Granny sagged dramatically as she grasped it. There were still traces of wolf blood on the blade.
"Dearie me, it's a big one," she said. "And you're good with this, I expect." "Won the silver belt 2 years running at the forest revels," said the woodcutter proudly. 2 years running? 2 years running? Locks, that is good. That's very good. And here's me hardly able to lift it."
Granny grasped the axe in one hand and swung it inexpertly. The woodcutter jumped backward as the blade whirred past his face, and then buried itself a quarter of an inch deep in a tree.
"Sorry about that," said Granny Weatherwax. "Aren't I a daft old woman? Never was good with anything technical."
He grinned at her and tried to pull the axe free. He sank to his knees, his face suddenly white. Granny leaned down until she was level with his ear.
"You could have seen to the old woman,"
she said quietly.
"You could have talked to the wolf. But you didn't, right?"
He tried to speak, but his teeth didn't seem to want to part. His teeth didn't seem to want to part, is what I said.
"I can see you're very sorry about all that,"
she said.
"I can see you're seeing the error of your ways. I bet you can't wait to be up and repairing her cottage for her, and getting the garden back in good order, and seeing she has fresh milk every day and a good supply of wood, right? In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you wasn't generous enough to build her a new cottage, with a proper well and all, somewhere near the village, so she don't have to live alone, right? You know, I can see the future sometimes, and I just know that's what's going to happen, right?"
Sweat ran off his face. Now his lungs didn't seem to be operating either.
"And I knows you're going to keep your word, and I'm so pleased about it that I'm going to make sure you're especially lucky,"
said Granny, her voice still in the same pleasant monotone.
"I knows it can be a dangerous job, wood chopping. People can get hurt. Trees can accidentally fall on 'em, or the top of their chopper can suddenly come off and cut their head open."
The woodcutter shuddered as Granny went on.
"So what I'm going to do is a little spell to make sure that none of this happens to you, on account of me being so grateful, because of you helping the old lady. Right? Just nod."
He managed to move his head a fraction. Granny Weatherwax smiled.
"There,"
she said, standing up and brushing a speck of leaf mold off her dress.
"You see how sweet life can be if we all helps one another?"
I think that's probably a good place to stop. Told you Granny was skilled in intimidation as part of her magic. Yep, that was the intimidation, all right. That was a good bit of intimidation. But I also think that might have been intimidation as a strength check to start. Oh boy. Granny's very good with the implied hexing. That got real heavy for a bit. Yes, it did. It's an interesting thing going and looking at a story like Little Red Riding Hood and looking just a little deeper to question the grandmother's circumstances. Why did she live in a forest all by herself? Within walking distance for a little girl, but still inside a dangerous forest where there's a dangerous wolf. It's in the middle of a pretty barred story. Oh boy. Yep, that was something. I feel like that is pretty standard Pratchett, the whole starting out light and funny jokes and still having light and funny and jokes, but as you get a little deeper into the book, you get these dark moments. You read an early version in Children's Lit, the wolf was a werewolf. Were was an old word for man. Oh. Well, we had what? Sleeping Beauty and Little Red Riding Hood. Pretty close one after the other. One of them metaphors. I was just gonna say the Sleeping Beauty one got done with pretty quick. Just okay. Toss the spinning wheel out the window, wake up the girl, that wakes up everybody else, and then get the heck out of here because they're angry. Very practical, like they knew the cause, they knew how to end it, just get it over with. Well, and Sleeping Beauty is sort of a weird story in that, like, there isn't a lot to it, right? You've got your setup, then you've got a bunch of sleeping, and then the people wake up. Like, there's not a lot of depth to that by itself. Sleep Pig Beauty. But yeah, they started happening pretty quick there. Rapid fire stories. Wonder what's next. So it looks like Bear, Slightly Stupid Bear, is playing some Deep Rock Galactic. It's the first time I've seen him streaming while I've ended my stream for a while, so I'm going to start a raid over to him. I hope everybody has a nice relaxing weekend or a nice fun weekend or what have you. Have I ever watched The Storyteller? Yeah, I've seen at least some of it, but it has been quite a long time. I think it was all on Netflix or somewhere not that long ago. Or it's probably on Disney Plus, actually. I'm sure Disney Plus must have it. But it's based off older, less known fairy tales. I wonder if I can find my book. I've talked about it before. I don't know if I have it and it's packed away or if it's at my parents' house somewhere hidden or what. But I had this old book of like 365 fairy tales when I was a kid, and it was one fairy tale for every day of the year, and they had some pretty obscure stories in there. They all have a bit of a dark edge to them. Yeah, I mean, there's the Matchstick Girl or the Dancing Shoes. Those were both in my book. A few of the various like Arabian tales were in there. Thanks for the plug, Farmhouse. Yeah, it's all under the same name on YouTube, Sleet Reads. Yeah, no, maybe I should go take a look at some point, but because that's very fitting with what we're getting into here. Because some of those fairy tales they're cautionary tales, a lot of them, or morality tales. All right. One storyteller that's close to Cinderella with sinister twist of the girl having to marry her father. Gross. They're dark is what they are. Yeah, a lot of them are. I'm hoping I'm going to have maybe a little bit of a relaxing weekend. It's been pretty busy lately. Not that I'm going to object if there's another house showing or something like that, because we need to sell our house. Maybe the people today will want to buy it. That would be great. But I also wouldn't be upset if there wasn't one. All right, so hopefully everyone has a lovely weekend. I'm going to raid us over to Bear. Go say hi to him. Watch him doing the rock and stone with the space dwarfs. Yeah, I'll be back next Wednesday. Have a good weekend. Have a good week until then. Starting the raid. Bye.